This is Heaven is Real, but So is Hell. Join us as we journey through the extraordinary life of Vassula Rydén and her supernatural encounters with the divine realm.
Chapter 1. All my life, I've seen the spiritual realm. I see angels and saints and other supernatural beings. I see the souls of dead people. I see them just as clearly as you see living people. Some people hear music in their ears and write symphonies. Others see numbers in their mind's eye and solve amazing mathematical equations. I've been called to see the supernatural. If you met me on the street, you would never suspect this. I look and act much like everyone else. I'm not a nun, or a recluse, or a gypsy fortune teller. I'm just like you. Yet, I'm invited to see in visions a world, a dimension, far beyond you and me. It's an invisible world that surrounds us, a world of angels and demons, and powers and forces that affect every moment of our lives. I see that world, and seeing it changes the way I see our material world. It helps me grasp the hidden meaning behind so many unanswered questions in our lives. Where do people go when they die? Is there a heaven and a hell and anything in between? Do demons or evil spirits exist, or are they just a myth? Does everything happen for a reason? If God is good, why does He allow us to suffer? Can dreams or premonitions tell us the future? Are we living in the last days? Will there be, in the end, any divine justice? Unending questions about life and death and what we are all doing here. The answers to many of these questions can only be discovered by seeing them from a different perspective, like turning over the backside of a tapestry to see how all the tangled threads create an elegant image. And from my earliest days, mystical experiences were given to me by God, not only to enable me to see from that perspective, but for His own reasons as well. This is a story of amazing, incredible experiences and encounters with the divine, with God, and what they mean to me, to you, and to the whole world. Beginnings. I was in my late teens living in Switzerland when I first saw the dead. They just appeared to me one day, sitting all around me on the floor of our family home. They all looked alike, men and women, indistinguishable one from another, sitting so close to each other, as though glued together. I knew they were real, though I had no doubt that they were dead. They were all the same shape, bald-headed, with grayish complexions, and they seemed emaciated. Their ash-colored garments were so plain as to be unnoticeable. I had no idea who they were or why they chose to surround me, but I knew they were departed souls. From time to time, without any warning, wherever I happened to be in the house, I would see with the eyes of my soul this crowd of dead people. What impressed me was their silence and the respect they had for me. I noticed that one of them in the center of the group would lift himself above the others to give a sign, reminding the others to keep silent so as not to disturb me. They would sit there for hours, as though they were waiting for something to happen, or perhaps because they felt comfortable and peaceful. Strangely, their presence never bothered me nor frightened me. I never wondered why they were appearing to me or what it meant. I was fully aware that no one else around me saw them. So, I never brought it up and never told anyone, not even my parents. At first, the dead were silent, but later, they began to manifest themselves in different ways, speaking and motioning to me so I would understand what they wanted. Much later, 20 years later, I understood the meaning of their presence. They no longer sat together in silence, encircling me, but appeared individually to me. Either they would make their presence known to me, or they would be signaling for help, especially for prayers. On many occasions, late at night or before sunrise, I would hear audibly a knock on the door, or sometimes the doorbell would ring. Upon opening, I would not see anyone, but could sense a presence and knew that a soul was crying out to me for help. Sometimes I would be lifted into their realm and find myself among them. My physical body was not actually transported, but in a mystical way, my spirit would be present with the dead, and they could see me clearly. They knew I was not one of them, and that I was alive and still on earth. Some even showed their astonishment, as if to say, "What are you doing here with us?" It was clear that they were suffering, and their connection with me was a way to ask for help. But it would be years before I knew how to respond. Seeing the dead was not my first experience with the other world. I was not more than 4 years old when I began to have recurring nightmares, in which I saw the supernatural world. If anyone asks, "Can a demon cause nightmares?" The answer is yes, it can. But we cannot classify all our nightmares in this way. There are nightmares that come from natural or psychological causes. In time, one learns to tell one from the other. At the time, I was living in Egypt, born into a Greek family that had lived there for 4 generations. In my dreams, I would get out of bed to walk into a dimly lit corridor. At the end of the corridor was a huge black dog with fearful red eyes, baring his teeth, ready to pounce on me and tear me to bits. Something inside me made me realize this dog was not a normal dog, but a demon. At 6 years old, these terrifying experiences moved from my dreams into my awake state. One night, I lay awake in my bed when suddenly, by the dim light of the night lamp, I clearly saw 2 ugly hands, those of an old man, appearing before me, just above my throat. I froze with fear. As I stared at them, they came lower and reached for my neck to strangle me. I did not want to yell, lest I wake my family, so still lying down, I struggled to avoid the hands, moving my head backwards until, still frozen with fear, I saw them no more. This vision distressed me so much that early the next morning I told my mother. Last night, I saw two ugly hands reaching for my neck. I know they were evil because they intended to strangle me. My mother, seeing how upset I was, thought it best to convince me that the hands were not from an evil being, but rather from the Virgin Mary. But I always knew those ugly old hands could not have been the Virgin Mary's. And years later, I would find out who they really belonged to. At age 10, I had one of my first premonitions. My parents had decided we would go on vacation from Egypt to Lebanon. My mother began making the travel arrangements and sewing new clothes for the trip, as it was customary at that time to sew garments as opposed to buying them from department stores. We were all very excited at this prospect of traveling abroad by sea for the first time. With the holiday preparations well underway, we went to visit some relatives. While the adults were talking enthusiastically about the upcoming holiday in Lebanon, we children all went to play. Suddenly, an inexplicable fear seized me, filling my entire being with terror. I began to tremble and burst into tears. Somehow, I knew without a doubt that death was waiting for me on the journey to Lebanon. I knew that if I went on that trip, I would not return alive. The strange premonition was not in my imagination. I felt it was a supernatural intervention to save my life. I ran inside to my mother, crying, and she kept asking, "What's happened to you? Did you fall? Has somebody hurt you?" Everyone saw that I was terrified, but I couldn't speak. Finally, between sobs, I blurted out, "If you take me over there, I'll never come back alive." I repeated this over and over again. Everyone was shocked. Then one of my relatives, knowing full well how my mother would respond to my premonition, said, "Well, I guess that's the end of that trip." He was right. My mother knew I had a connection beyond the natural world, and this premonition was enough for her to cancel the trip. No one objected, and for a while, no one mentioned holidays or Lebanon again. I never came to know what the danger was in Lebanon, but it became clear to me that God was protecting me. He had a plan for my life, and He would preserve me for that purpose. Sometime later, I had a dream, and it was so real to me. I immediately described it to my parents the next morning. I saw Jesus, and He was smiling at me. In my dream, I was standing in a corridor filled with very bright light, when suddenly, on the wall opposite me, I saw Jesus' face. I was only a few meters away from Him. He was smiling and said, "Come to me." Then, an incomprehensible force like a current pulled me towards Him. I could not resist it, and found myself sliding towards Him. He said, "Come to me," 3 times, and each time the force dragged me closer to Him. I began to feel afraid because I could not control my feet. But finally, my face reached His, and then, in an instant, my face went through His. After telling my dream to my parents, my father told my mother, Here's another of these dreams of hers. I don't know what will become of this child. Jesus is visiting her in dreams. My mother believed the dream was a sign indicating it was now safe to travel, that she changed our holiday destination to Cyprus. During our whole trip, she wouldn't take her eyes off me, especially when we rode donkeys through the mountains. As my donkey trotted along the cliff's edge, my mother kept frantically pulling it toward the safe side of the road. But stubborn as it was, the donkey got its way, and somehow both my mother and I survived. About 2 years later, at 12 years old, I had another mystical dream. I was getting married. The bridegroom was Christ. I was walking near him, and there were many people joyously waving palms, standing back to open a passage for him to pass by. I was not allowed to see him, although I felt him by my side. Just after that, I walked into a room where his mother Mary greeted me with delight. Then, full of smiles, she arranged my hair and my dress, making sure I would be presentable for her son. The amazing thing was that all during this early period of mystical dreams and premonitions, I was never a religious person. I did, however, attend a parochial school along with my brother and 2 sisters. Our headmistress was elderly and strict. If we students dared to roll up our sleeves, loosen our tie, or unbutton our shirt collar, she would reprimand us. It didn't matter if you were dying in the stifling heat. The rules were the rules. And when the rules were broken, a good beating would be administered by our beloved headmistress. I was called to her office many times to get acquainted with her rod. My embarrassment and my ego kept me silent, however, so my parents never knew of the swollen welts marking my thighs. The missionary school teachers were too religious for my taste. We began every school day by reciting a psalm and saying the Lord's Prayer in the assembly hall. I found it boring, and when some teachers added even more prayers, I considered them fanatic. We'd already talked to God, so why add more? I had no problem talking to Jesus in dreams, but these school-imposed religious practices did not agree with me. On top of that, I was rather poor at my lessons, except for literature, dictation, and art, and I preferred to use my wit to entertain my schoolmates. I had the knack of making them laugh, so I became the class clown. Some girls even asked me to become my friends in order to spice up their lives. My teachers, meanwhile, had rightly classified me as a troublemaker and a nuisance. Some wouldn't even allow me in their class, knowing my presence might lead to mayhem. In these early teen years, I had become a leader of sorts, but I felt rejected by my teachers. Still, my ego kept me from showing it, and I pretended it didn't matter. Soon, I was being blamed and punished, even when the fault was not mine. One day, our teacher, worried by the disruptive class, decided to take it out on me. She slapped my cheek and shouted, "Detention!" I challenged her and shouted back, "Double it," which of course she promptly did. As the class froze in silence, they knew I had taken the punishment for all of them. They knew I didn't deserve it, but I had become an easy scapegoat. Then, something happened that no one would have predicted, except God, who clearly has a sense of humor. At the start of every school year, each class voted for a classroom captain, whose job was to sit in the teacher's chair and keep good order during the teacher's absence. At the end of the year, a big silver cup was awarded to the best and most disciplined class. I could not believe it when the girls decided to make me their class captain. Obviously, they imagined that I, one of the worst among them, would be a fun captain who would never report them to the teacher. And though I strongly objected to taking on this role, they all insisted, and I was appointed. As soon as the teacher left the room, the class predictably went wild, chasing one another, standing up on the desks, yelling, laughing, and throwing pencils. It was worse than a zoo, as the animals there have cages. It was a jungle. I called for quiet, but my voice was drowned out. Finally, I yelled at them, "If anyone makes another move or another sound, I'll hand your names over to the teacher." Of course, they assumed I was bluffing. So they continued the tumult. No one even noticed as I began to write down their names, one by one. When the teacher returned, I promptly handed her my list of reprobates. My classmates were stunned. Some gasped and started to cry, and others glared at me for betraying them. But I knew I had simply done my job, the job they themselves had given me. I was given a responsibility, and I was going to fulfill it, even if that meant losing favor with my friends. Duty outweighed diversions. From that day on, our class was converted and actually became orderly. In the end, we even won the silver cup for good behavior, and by then, my teachers couldn't figure out what would come next from me, class clown or class president. But what came next was something they would never have suspected, and it happened in the most unlikely manner. One day, as I was in religion class, listening to the story of Jesus' crucifixion, I was suddenly transported in a vision to the time and place where it all happened. I floated away in my mind to Jerusalem 2,000 years ago, like I had traveled through a time machine. It was night, and I could see the silhouette of the great walls of Jerusalem, picked out by the crimson light and swirling smoke from the many fires lit by people to keep themselves warm. I could actually feel the cool evening breeze on my cheek and smell the wood smoke as it wafted upwards on the dry air. The low murmur of conversation was all around me, and the air electric with anticipation. I knew it was a dark and terrifying hour, menacing, an hour of horror and an hour of agony that will remain eternally. Away from the town, I came to the olive grove of Gethsemane, where Jesus was praying in torment. It was after the Last Supper, and his disciples had come with him to keep watch, but they were all asleep on the job. I could sense the fear, the betrayal of Judas, and the abandonment that Jesus felt. But as he accepted his mission once again, the mission of dying on the cross, I could see thousands of fearing demons taking flight when love accepted to drink from the cup that was being offered to him by his Father. Then my vision shifted to the following morning, and I found myself on the winding path out of Jerusalem up towards Golgotha. Although it was daytime, the clouds were so low and dark that one would have thought the night was not over. My sandaled feet stood on dry vegetation, and I could hear the tramp and clank of the soldiers as they plodded up the hill. These scenes were frighteningly real. All around me, there were great crowds of people, and in the vision, I was just a small child. I couldn't see what was happening in front of me because of the throng of people, but I managed to squeeze myself around and between individuals, groups and families, until I was standing right by the path that Jesus took, carrying the dreadful cross. Time almost stood still, and I could see Jesus clearly as he now drew alongside me. He was a youngish man, panting for breath, exhausted, and near death. His face and body were bruised and bleeding, and he wore a cruel mockery of a crown made of thorns. The crown had scratched and pierced his forehead, and the blood ran down his face, congealing in his eyebrows and down his cheeks. Despite the fact that he was suffering a great deal, his soulful eyes deeply impressed me. I knew that what was taking place was unjust. I might have been a willful, mischievous kid, but I wasn't insensitive to the suffering of others. In my compassion, I was seized by a tremendous desire to grab hold of Jesus and lead him quickly to safety, away from his persecutors and from the evil crowds baying for his blood. But before I could rescue him, I found myself sitting in the classroom again, listening to the voice of my teacher reprimanding me for not paying attention in class. I looked around and wondered if the other kids noticed I had been gone. No doubt, I must have looked entirely out to lunch during a vision like that. I thought about how ironic this was. At the very moment when I seemed to be ignoring my teacher's efforts to teach me about God, I was actually reliving the biblical events mystically, in living color. How could they possibly have known? They couldn't, because I never told a soul. I knew I could never describe what had taken place, and I knew they'd think I was crazy anyway. But my vision in Jerusalem was soon followed by other visions, and they were far too intense to be mere fancies. Nevertheless, I was powerless to explain them, even to myself. Back in the real world, a new government had taken over in Egypt in 1956, and it was not friendly towards the Western countries. Consequently, our city of Cairo came under attack. We were being bombed daily, and the war had a devastating effect on our society, especially for the children. Living in fear of warplanes day and night prevented anyone from living a normal life. Eventually, the stress got to my mother, and she determined to move the family somewhere safe, to a place where bombs never fall. The answer became clear: Switzerland, a country that had been neutral for centuries. Thus, in the middle of my teen years, a new adventure began. With virtually all our possessions sold, we left Egypt and went north to Alexandria, where we boarded a ship and sailed to Italy. Once there, I was enthralled. I had never seen the green pastures of Europe and the bustling, colorful streets. As we traveled north from Italy by train, the colored fields and little towns eventually gave way to the white-capped mountains of Switzerland. It was amazing. Our train was bound for Geneva, but about an hour before it was due to arrive, we pulled into the station of another Swiss city, Lausanne. We decided to get off and look around. After a short walk through the beautiful town, my siblings and I begged our parents to stay. With no reason not to, they agreed, and we set up home there. The transition was rough at first, but over the next 3 years, we assimilated well into Swiss culture. We worked hard at school and came to know our neighbors and our new country well. By the time I was 18, we had moved to nearby Pully into a bigger flat set in peaceful surroundings with a small garden and a veranda overlooking Lake Geneva. It was there that I had my first encounter with the dead, as I recounted earlier. It was also at this age that I began to experience a social life, going out with my friends and meeting boys. Sometimes we gathered in small groups for coffee, a snack, or a pizza. We also went to the movies and gathered at someone's house to dance to popular rock music. These get-togethers somehow never appealed to me, because deep down I knew that most of the boys had only one thing in mind: to spend the night with the girl they had befriended. To me, that was not real love. I would also experience a feeling of emptiness inside me, invading my soul. Because of my guarded attitude, my dates never lasted long. And then afterwards, I would feel depressed, knowing my behavior was odd. I blamed myself and felt more and more like a misfit in this world. But despite my mystical experiences, the real world of dating, courtship, and love gradually started to overshadow the spiritual world. I tried more and more to be carefree like the other girls. I went from feeling like a fish out of water to joining dry land in an effort to fit in with society. For a girl of 18, that meant I should start looking for a husband. While I was out with friends one day in Lausanne, I met Johan, a young Swedish man who was to fulfill that role. We decided to get married when he was in his 20s, and once married, we moved to Sweden. Though starting a family in Sweden seemed exciting, I had problems adjusting to the dark winterish climate, the Scandinavian temperament, and the language barrier. Worse yet, I had no friends. My husband's family pushed me to learn Swedish, but that forced me to venture out into the cold winter nights to attend Swedish lessons. After 2 years, my husband finally finished his studies and took a job with the United Nations Development Program as a junior officer. In the middle of a Swedish winter, he was asked to take up an appointment in Sierra Leone, and I was happy to escape into the warmth of Africa. His job led to our traveling and living in many African countries. After Sierra Leone, we moved to Sudan, where my son Jan, our first baby, was born. It was in this desert country that God once again spared my life. I was carrying a couple of bottles when one of them fell and broke, causing a sharp fragment to cut my left ankle. After a day or two, the wound became badly infected and swelled to the size of a golf ball, oozing pus. I went to a doctor who disinfected the wound and assumed it would heal. Instead, it became worse. I was unable to put my foot down to walk, so I returned to the doctor. Afraid it might be gangrene, he put me in the hospital. There, he dug into the wound with a knife and scraped it clean. He then disinfected it and filled the hole with gauze, all without the help of any anesthetic. He said that the wound had to remain open to promote healing. His pain pills did nothing for me, so he gave me a shot of morphine. I was in bed with my husband sitting beside me, and my evening meal was served. When I started to eat, my breathing suddenly stopped for no apparent reason. I began to gasp for air and was literally choking. In my mind, I saw those ugly satanic hands which had come for my neck when I was a small child. In panic, I shot up, overturning the meal tray, trying desperately to breathe. I could feel that death was closing in on me. My husband ran out to call for help, but could not find anyone. It was all happening so fast, and there seemed to be nothing either of us could do. Then, just when all seemed lost, I suddenly started to breathe again. It was as though someone had unplugged my esophagus. The nurse finally came rushing in. Once she assessed the situation, she explained that the doctor must have given me an overdose of morphine, which my body couldn't handle. The evil hands of death had tried again to get me, but God had other plans, even though I was not ready for them yet. At the end of our term in Sudan, we moved with our 9-month-old son to Ethiopia for a new assignment of 5 years. There, my second son, Fabian, was born. Life was comfortable for expatriates, with many privileges. It was normal to employ servants, so I found a housekeeper, a good woman. With no housework or cooking to do, I had a lot of free time, and so I took up tennis. At first, I played to keep busy, but later it became a passion, with clubs, tournaments, and championships. When my second son Fabian was just 2 months old, we returned to Sweden. No sooner had we arrived than my husband had to leave for Africa again, spending many weeks there. Those were long weeks for me. I had no friends in Sweden, and I began to struggle with back problems, not to mention coping with the challenges of raising a baby and a small child on my own. Not surprisingly, my marriage also started to hit hard times, and my husband and I were becoming very distant with one another. Just when I felt that it was all too much for me, my husband was offered a long-term post in Mozambique. That sounded great to me, so we found ourselves packing again, ready to move. I can imagine God was watching all these events in my life, lovingly, observing my attempts to live a normal life. But normal life is filled with abnormalities, and when we handle them without God's help, our lives soon unravel. Matters did not improve in Mozambique. My marriage was disintegrating, and I seemed powerless to mend it. Somehow, he and I could not be everything for each other, and we weren't willing to fix it. So after many struggles, we finally came to the sad and difficult decision to separate. We agreed that for our children's sake, we would remain friends after the divorce, but it was nonetheless traumatic for all of us. It was my first big failure in life. I felt I had lost my bearings and lost my dignity. All of my dreams and premonitions and connections with the supernatural seemed to add up to nothing. I was just another person, struggling through life, and I was doing it without God's help. The time eventually came for my ex-husband to return to Sweden. And as my older son, Jan, was of school age, it seemed wise for them to go together. There, he could follow his schooling with his father by his side. I am sure Jan suffered from being parted from his mother and his younger brother Fabian. For me, it was the hardest period of my life. We got together as often as possible, but the brothers were separated, and I deeply missed my firstborn son. A family is meant to be a unit, connected and supportive. Breaking up that unit rips all of the members apart emotionally. But somehow we survived, and life went on. Eventually, I met another Swede named Per Rydén. He was a kind man, and despite the wounds I still bore from my first marriage, I felt I could trust him. I also knew it was important for my younger son Fabian to have a father at home to help raise him. I was older and more mature now, and I believed I could make marriage work a second time around. So Per and I were married. Per's work also led us to developing countries, and we soon moved to Mozambique, where I had lived once before. And then after 2 years, we moved to Lesotho. A posting to this country was listed as a hardship post, although our daily life was not so bad. During our time there, we were caught up in something extraordinary. Apartheid in 1982 was at its height. One night, we were awakened by the tremendous noise of tanks rolling by, machine guns firing, and grenades exploding. It was horrific. Per shouted to us to remain flat on our beds and not to stand up because bullets outside were flying everywhere. Our tin bungalow would have become a sieve if the bullets had come our way. The violence eventually died down, but what was left in its wake was horrendous. The South African troops had massacred people everywhere. Even innocent women and children, pleading for their lives, were mercilessly gunned down in cold blood. The racial tensions in the country worsened, and crime proliferated. Widespread poverty and hatred seized the nation, and it seemed like everywhere we looked, criminals were multiplying. It was anarchy. Burglars would come to people's homes in the night, armed with rocks and hatchets. If people did not cooperate and hand over their valuables, they were attacked. All our friends were arming themselves, and even Per and I decided to keep an iron rod near our bed and bought a plastic pistol that shot a liquid that would temporarily blind any intruder. Ironically, during the daylight hours, things seemed relatively normal. I still went to the club to play tennis, went shopping, and got together with friends. But at night, everyone feared going to bed, expecting the worst. One night, I awoke and could not get back to sleep. Time and again, just as I was about to doze off, an invisible hand would shake me, keeping me awake. At around 1 a.m., as I was half asleep, I began to hear a snapping sound at regular intervals. In my mind, I saw a vision of a burglar's hands holding a large wire cutter, cutting through the mosquito net near the front door in order to reach the lock and open the door. I immediately became wide awake, and I was about to jump out of bed when I heard a crystal clear voice somewhere inside me ordering me to stay in bed and wait. "Don't get up yet," the voice said. And again, as I moved, it said, "Not yet. Wait." I obeyed the voice. It was powerful in its command, but kind. Not for a moment did it cross my mind to disobey. It reassured me over and over, telling me to wait. And soon, I lost track of time. Then suddenly, in an urgent tone, the voice ordered me to get up. I obeyed and went swiftly to the back of the house to get a view of the kitchen door. I saw nothing amiss. I silently returned to our bedroom and slowly pulled the curtain back, and there, right in front of me, a man was standing outside our house while his accomplice attempted to unlock the door to break in. My husband and the boys were still fast asleep. So much for chivalry. They had not heard a thing, and neither had our dog. But when I saw the man outside the window, I yelled out at the top of my lungs, "Per, there is someone out there!" My shouting awakened Per, but more importantly, it scared the intruder half to death. He jumped out of his skin. Then he and his friend ran off and scrambled over the fence like rabbits into our neighbor's yard. At the time, I hadn't the faintest idea who the voice was that guided me to scream at just the right moment when the burglar was outside my window. Nor did I realize that years later I would come to know that voice in the distant land of Bangladesh. But once again, God had been protecting me, and soon I would find out why.